Welcome back to Brain Boost Lab, where we help you learn faster, remember more, and get those brain cows to say cheese. Today's video, how can you possibly study for an hour and feel like you learned nothing? Or worse, feel completely exhausted like your brain just ran a marathon while you were just sitting in one spot. Are you the one who studied all night but still got a bad grade? Don't worry, we've all been there. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It means you might be hitting a cognitive wall. Think of your brain as a computer, or maybe a race car. Let's call this concept bandwidth. What happens if you have like 50 tabs open, 200 notifications, and you're trying to find the best one so you can finally finish? Maybe our computer will slow down or lag. It can't handle that much all at once. Same thing with our brains. There's a limit to how much information we can process without getting overloaded. And when we hit that limit, things start to shut down. But don't worry, there are ways around this. We'll show you how to increase your brain's bandwidth so you can learn more efficiently. First, let's talk about working memory. No, not that kind of work, Mr. Williams. Working memory is like a temporary storage space in your brain for holding and manipulating information. It's like a little desk where you keep all the stuff you're currently using. You can only hold a limited amount of things on your desk at once, like maybe 4 to 7 chunks of information. A chunk is like a unit of information. It could be a word, a phrase, or even a whole bunch of related information that you're treating as one thing. For example, when you're reading a book, each sentence is like a chunk of information. If you're playing a video game, each character might be a chunk of information. You're trying to remember a phone number, each digit is a chunk. In fact, you probably use a chunk when you're memorizing information too. It's easier to remember someone's phone number like this because you break it down into groups rather than memorizing 10 digits straight. Working memory is important because it's what allows us to do things like pay attention, make decisions, and solve problems. When we have a lot of stuff going on, it can be hard to keep track of everything, and that's when mistakes happen. Like when you're driving and you forget where you were supposed to turn because you were distracted by a text message. Oops. So now you're probably wondering, why does any of this matter? Why should I care about working memory or bandwidth? Well, understanding how our brains work can help us learn more effectively and achieve our goals. Imagine you're at a party and you meet someone you really want to impress. You start chatting and they ask you a question you don't know the answer to. What do? You could try to bluff your way through it and hope they don't ask follow-up questions. Or you could admit you do. I'd know the answer, but try to steer the conversation to something you do know. That way you can show off your expertise and maybe even make a good impression. This is basically the same thing. Instead of trying to brute force your way through a subject you don't understand well, focus on the topics you're already familiar with. If you know a bit about everything, it's easier to build on what you already know and learn new things. This is called building a web of knowledge, and it's a great way to learn more efficiently. Learning is like building a network of roads. When you first start learning something, it can be tough and feel like you're only moving a few miles per hour on a dirt road. But as you learn more and make connections between new ideas and things you already know, it's like upgrading the road to a smooth and efficient highway. The more you drive on it, the better it gets. Eventually, you can get from one idea to another in no time flat. You will be able to see connections that others might miss and come up with creative solutions to problems. Now let's get back to the cognitive load. Cognitive load is the total mental effort your brain is using to process information. When you're working on a problem, your brain is using some of its power to think about the problem itself, and then some more power to remember the facts and rules you need to solve it. As you get closer to a solution, you might have to use even more of your brain power to consider different possibilities and evaluate the results of each option. This takes up a lot of your brain's energy, which is why sometimes you feel mentally drained after spending an hour studying. It depends on a few things, like how difficult the task is and how experienced you are at it. For example, if you're a beginner at playing StarCraft, you'll probably get pretty tired after playing for an hour. But if you've been playing for years, you might be able to play for hours without getting too tired. The same goes for studying. If you're new at it, you won't be able to study for long periods without taking a break. But if you're more experienced, you'll be able to handle more cognitive load before you need to take a break. But no matter how experienced you are, there's always a limit to how much cognitive load you can handle. When you reach that limit, you might start to feel confused, frustrated, or like you're not making any progress. This is called reaching your cognitive load limit. So So how do you prevent yourself from reaching your cognitive load limit? One way is to take breaks. Taking a break can help you clear your head and come back to your work feeling refreshed. Another way is to simplify your task. By breaking down a complex task into smaller, simpler tasks, you can manage your cognitive load more effectively. For example, instead of trying to memorize everything at once, break down the material into smaller chunks and learn them one at a time. Finally, you can use visuals. Using diagrams, flowcharts, and other visuals can help. You see the relationships between different concepts and make connections more easily. This can also help you reduce the amount of cognitive load you experience while learning. So next time you sit down to study, be aware of your cognitive load. Take breaks when you need them. Simplify your task and use visuals to help you learn. All right, let's test the knowledge we just acquired. What was the first tip we gave you to combat cognitive load? Was it taking breaks? Simplifying your task? Using visuals? Pause the video here if you want to make a guess. Did you pick a B or C? Got your answer? Check it out. Yep, A is correct. The first tip was to take breaks. You picked B, you're wrong, my friend. It's not about cramming more information into your brain. It's about giving your brain a chance to rest and recharge. And you guessed it, C is also incorrect. Although using visuals is a great tip, it was actually our third tip. So you're not quite right, but you're thinking like a true scientist. Keep practicing. All right, round 2. What's the name of the concept we were discussing? Was it bandwidth? Working memory? Cognitive load? Pause the video here if you want to make a guess. Got your answer. Check it out. If you said cognitive load, you're absolutely right. Bandwidth is a metaphor we use to describe the concept, but the formal term is cognitive load. Nice job. And working memory is another concept we talked about today. But it wasn't the main focus of this video. So you're partially right, but not quite. Time for round 3. This is a tricky one. Working memory is like a temporary storage space in your brain for holding and manipulating information. True or false? Check it out, that's right. Working memory is a temporary storage space, so the statement is true. Good job, you're a true Brain Boost Lab champion. So remember, you're not a failure if you don't seem to remember everything you study. You just might be hitting your cognitive load limit. So take breaks, simplify your task, and use visuals to help you learn. And hey, don't forget to follow Brain Boost Lab for more science-based tips and tricks. Thanks for joining us in the lab today. Till next time, happy learning. Welcome back to Brain Boost Lab, where we turn struggling students into straight A students. Today's topic, the one study strategy that will change everything. Call it active recall, and it's backed by science. Stay tuned because in this video, we're going to show you how to use it. First, let me ask you a question. What was the first thing you did when you started studying for your midterms and finals? If you're like most students, you've probably started rereading your notes, textbooks, and flashcards. That makes sense, right? If you want to remember something, you just need to see it more often. But here's the problem. That study strategy works great for cramming for a test, but it doesn't work so well for actually learning. And there's a reason for that. It's the difference between passive and active learning. Let me explain. Passive learning is taking in information, things like reading, watching, or listening. Active learning is engaging with the material. So instead of highlighting your notes, what if you asked yourself questions about your notes? Instead of rereading your notes, what if you summarized them in your own words? That's active learning. In other words, doing something with the information rather than just letting the information sit there. It's like the difference between being shown a picture and recognizing it later versus actually memorizing the details of the picture and then being able to draw it from memory. One is passive, the other is active. But there's an even better way to study that combines the best of both worlds. We call it active recall. To understand how it works, let's take a look at two students. Both are preparing for their midterm exams. They have the same amount of material to study, the same amount of time to study it, and they both love using technology. The first student, we'll call him Kevin, uses simple note-taking software to organize his notes and flashcards. He highlights important points, creates different folders for different topics, and he also uses mind maps to connect ideas together. Those strategies can be helpful, but you know what? They're passive strategies, still relying on rereading to get the information into his brain. Now let's look at the second student. We'll call him Kyle. Kyle uses the same note-taking software as Kevin, but he's not satisfied with just highlighting or organizing. He wants to push himself to remember. So Kyle does something different. As he's reviewing his notes, he closes the tab and tries to summarize the main points without looking. Then he opens the tab and checks his summary against his notes. If he missed something, he adds it to his summary. Then he closes the tab again and reviews another set of notes. He repeats this process until he's finished with all of his notes. This is active recall. Notice how Kyle isn't just passively rereading his notes. He's actively testing himself to remember the information, and that's key. So which student do you think will get the higher grade on the exam? Of course, there are many factors that go into a grade, but all things considered, Kyle has a big advantage. That's because active recall is the most effective study technique out there, sometimes called the gold standard for memory. So how exactly does active recall improve your memory? To understand that, let's look inside the brain. Neurons are the cells that carry messages between different parts of the body. They do this by releasing chemicals called neurotransmitters. When you learn something new connections form between neurons. These connections are called synapses. And the more you use these synapses, the stronger they become. That's how you form memories. But here's the catch. If you don't use these synapses, they begin to disappear. It's like a workout. If you don't lift weights regularly, you'll lose muscle mass. Your brain works the exact same way. The more you exercise your brain, the stronger it gets. The less you exercise your brain, the weaker it gets. So how does active recall help you exercise your brain? When you're using active recall, you're forcing your brain to retrieve information. That retrieval strengthens the synapses between neurons. On the other hand, if you're just rereading your notes, you're not really exercising your brain. It's kind of like lifting the same weight every time. Eventually you'll get stronger, but you won't get nearly as strong as you could. Active recall is like increasing the weight load every time you study. That increases the difficulty, but it also increases the benefits. So now that you know why active recall works, let me show you how to use it with your own notes. The first step is to create your notes, and you can do that however you want. Some people prefer text notes, while others prefer visual notes. The key is to include as much detail as possible. That gives you more opportunities to practice active recall. Next, review your notes to make sure you understand everything. You don't understand something, go back and review it until you do. Once you understand the material, it's time for step 3. Take a break and then try to remember everything you learned. You can start with simple questions like, what was the main point of this section? Then you can move on to more complex questions like, how do these concepts relate to each other? Or what are some examples of this concept? This is the active recall workout for your brain. Try to remember everything without looking at your notes. Don't worry if you can't remember everything. It's to be expected, just do your best. After you've tried to remember everything, check your answers. If you got an answer wrong, go back and review that part of your notes. This is an important step. It helps you identify any gaps in your knowledge. Once you've reviewed the material, take another break and repeat the process. Keep doing this until you've gone through all of your notes. You know it can be tough to start, but the good news is it gets easier with practice. In fact, you only need to practice active recall for about 15 minutes per day to see improvements in your memory. So how soon will you notice a difference? Well, that depends on a few factors, such as how much time you have to study and how well you understand the material. However, in our experience working with thousands of students, we've seen that most students start to notice a difference within a few weeks. It's important to keep practicing active recall, even after you start seeing results. That's because active recall is like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. So make it a habit to practice active recall every time you study. There's just one more thing. We know that not all students have the same needs. Some students might need more help than others. That's why we created a self-paced online course that teaches you how to use active recall with detailed step-by-step tutorials. Plus, you'll get access to our free study strategy toolkit, which includes templates and study guides. You can learn more by clicking the link in the description below. So are you ready to give active recall a try? Let us know in the comments. And hey, before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Brain Boost Lab. We release new videos every week to help you get straight A's. If you found this video helpful, please share it with your friends. Thank you for watching. See you next time.